Marcus sat in his empty apartment, staring at the wedding photo on the coffee table. 3 years had passed since Sarah's accident, but the pain still felt fresh every morning when he woke up expecting to see her beside him. The doctors had called it a tragic collision, something about a drunk driver running a red light. Marcus remembered very little about those first few months after the funeral. Friends and family had tried to help, bringing casseroles and offering shoulders to cry on. But eventually, life moved on for everyone except him. His job at the accounting firm became his only routine. Numbers didn't require emotions, didn't ask how he was feeling, didn't remind him of Saturday morning pancakes or late-night movie marathons. His colleagues had stopped inviting him to after-work drinks months ago. Marcus preferred it that way. Social gatherings meant questions about his well-being, pitying looks, and awkward silences when someone mentioned their weekend plans with their spouse. The apartment felt like a museum. It's dedicated to a life that no longer existed. Sarah's books still lined the shelves. Her favorite mug sat unwashed in the sink, and her pillow remained untouched on her side of the bed. Marcus had tried moving her things once, about 6 months after the accident, but the emptiness that followed felt worse than the constant reminders. At least with her belongings around, he could pretend she had just stepped out to the grocery store. His sister Emma called every few days, each conversation following the same pattern. She would ask about work, mention something about her kids, and then carefully suggest that maybe it was time for Marcus to consider dating again, or at least getting out more. Marcus would give short responses, promise to think about it, then continue his routine of work, take out dinners, and falling asleep on the couch while watching old sitcoms. The weekends were the hardest. Saturdays and Sundays stretched endlessly before him, filled with silence and memories. He had tried keeping busy with home improvement projects, but every task reminded him of plans he and Sarah had made together. The garden she wanted to plant, the bathroom they were going to renovate, the vacation to Italy they had been saving. 4. Dreams that died with her on that rainy Tuesday evening. Marcus had been to grief counseling twice. Both sessions ended with him walking out halfway through when the therapist suggested he needed to process his feelings and work through the stages of grief. He didn't want to process anything, wanted his wife back, wanted to rewind time. Wanted to have insisted on driving her to her book club meeting that night instead of letting her take the car alone. The guilt was as constant as the grief, a heavy weight that settled in his chest and never left. His reflection in the bathroom mirror each morning showed a man who had aged years in months. Dark circles under his eyes, a beard he rarely bothered to trim properly, and clothes that hung looser on his frame than they used to. Sarah would have been worried about him, would have forced him to eat proper meals and go for walks in the park they used to visit together. But Sarah wasn't there to worry about anything anymore, and Marcus had forgotten how to worry about himself. The community center volunteer coordinator had been calling for weeks before Marcus finally answered. Emma had signed him up without asking, claiming he needed something meaningful to occupy his time. Marcus had planned to decline politely, but something in the woman's voice made him hesitate. She wasn't pushy or overly cheerful like most people who tried to help him. She simply explained that they needed someone to help with their literacy program for elderly residents. Just a few hours on Saturday mornings, Marcus found himself agreeing before he understood why. Maybe it was because teaching reading seemed far removed from his own emotional turmoil, or perhaps because Saturday mornings were becoming unbearable in their emptiness. Either way, he showed up the following weekend wearing a wrinkled shirt and carrying a coffee that had already gone cold. The community center buzzed with activity even early on Saturday. Seniors gathered around tables, some working on crossword puzzles, others playing cards or simply chatting about their grandchildren. Marcus felt out of place immediately, wondering what he could possibly offer these people who seemed more alive than he had felt in years. The coordinator, Mrs. Peterson, introduced him to his student with enthusiasm that felt forced and awkward. Elena Vasquez sat alone at a corner table, a worn paperback novel in front of her and reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked to be in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. When Mrs. Peterson explained that Marcus would be helping her improve her English reading skills, Elena studied him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. She thanked Mrs. Peterson politely, then waited until they were alone before speaking. Her accent was soft but noticeable as she explained that she had been in America for 40 years, had raised 3 children, and worked as a seamstress, but had never learned to read well in English. Her husband had always handled anything requiring reading, from bills to school forms to medical documents.
Ow.
When he passed away 2 years ago, she found herself struggling with tasks that seemed simple to everyone else. The admission clearly embarrassed her. But she met Marcus's eyes directly as she spoke. Marcus felt something stir in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. It's a spark of purpose that had nothing to do with his own pain. Alina's courage in facing this challenge at her age, her dignity in asking for help, reminded him of qualities he had forgotten he once admired in people. They spent that first session working through a simple story about a family garden, Alina reading slowly but determinedly while Marcus offered gentle corrections and encouragement. As the hour ended, Alina closed the book carefully and looked at Marcus with a small smile. She told him that her husband used to read to her every evening, stories from newspapers or books he borrowed from the library. It was one of the things she missed most about him, that daily connection to words and stories. She hoped that learning to read better would help her feel closer to him somehow, as if she could continue the conversations they used to have about the characters and events in the books he shared with her. Walking to his car afterward,
Marcus
realized he had gone nearly 2 hours without thinking about Sarah or his own grief. The recognition hit him like a physical blow, followed immediately by guilt. How could he have allowed himself even a brief respite from mourning her? But underneath the guilt was something else, a tiny seed of possibility that maybe, just maybe, there were still reasons to engage with the world beyond his apartment walls. Weeks turned into months, and Marcus found himself looking forward to Saturday mornings in a way that surprised him. Alina proved to be more than just a student. She was a natural storyteller who filled their reading sessions with memories of her childhood in Mexico, tales of raising children while working multiple jobs, and observations about life that often left Marcus thinking long after their sessions ended. Her reading improved steadily, but more importantly, their conversations began to chip away at the walls Marcus had built around his heart. Alina had an uncanny ability to sense when Marcus was having particularly difficult days, never asked direct questions about his obvious sadness, but instead would share stories about her own experiences with loss and recovery. She spoke about the first year after her husband's death, how she had felt like a ghost wandering through her own life, going through motions without really living. Her honesty about her struggles gave Marcus permission to acknowledge his own pain without feeling like he was burdening someone else. One Saturday, Alina arrived with a small potted plant, explaining that she had started a garden on her apartment balcony and wanted to share some of the joy it brought her. As she described tending to her tomatoes and herbs, her face lit up with genuine happiness that Marcus hadn't seen before. She mentioned that gardening helped her feel connected to her husband, who had always maintained a vegetable garden behind their old house. Working with the soil and watching things grow reminded her that life continued, that beauty and nourishment could still emerge from the earth even after loss. Marcus found himself sharing details about his life that he hadn't spoken aloud since Sarah's death. He told Alina about their plans for a garden, about Sarah's love of reading, about the future they had imagined together. Alina listened without judgment or attempts to offer solutions, simply acknowledging his pain while gently pointing out the love that still lived in his memories. She had a way of reframing his grief not as something to overcome, but as evidence of how deeply he had been able to love. Their reading sessions expanded beyond the simple books provided by the community center. Alina expressed interest in reading romance novels, explaining with a mischievous smile that she enjoyed stories about second chances and new beginnings. As they worked through these books together, Marcus found himself drawn into the narratives. Despite his initial resistance, stories of characters learning to love again after loss felt both painful and oddly comforting. Alina began sharing more personal insights during their time together. She talked about the loneliness that followed her husband's death, but also about the gradual recognition that honoring his memory didn't require her to stop living her own life. She described the process of learning to cook for one person, to make decisions without consulting anyone else, and to find joy in small daily moments. Her journey toward independence and self-discovery inspired something in Marcus that he couldn't quite name yet. The other volunteers and students at the community center started to notice the bond developing between Marcus and Alina. Mrs. Peterson commented that Alina seemed more confident and engaged, while Marcus appeared less withdrawn than when he first started volunteering. Their friendship was becoming something that enriched both of their lives, though neither of them had explicitly acknowledged the depth of their connection. Marcus simply knew that Saturday mornings had become the brightest part of his week, and Elena's wisdom was slowly teaching him that healing didn't mean forgetting, but rather learning to carry love forward into whatever came next. The turning point came on a particularly gray Saturday morning when Marcus arrived at the community center to find Alina absent for the first time since they had started working together. Mrs. Peterson explained that Alina had been feeling unwell and decided to stay home, offering to give Marcus her phone number in case he wanted to check on her. The concern that flooded through Marcus surprised him with its intensity, reminding him of emotions he thought he had buried permanently. After spending an hour helping other students with their reading, Marcus found himself driving to Elena's apartment building. He told himself he was simply being a good friend, but the worry gnawing at his stomach suggested something deeper. Alina answered her door wearing a bathrobe and looking tired, but her face brightened immediately when she saw him. She invited him in for tea, apologizing for missing their session and insisting she was feeling much better. Elena's small apartment was warm and welcoming, filled with family photographs, handmade quilts, and the lingering scent of the herbs she grew on her balcony. As they sat drinking tea at her kitchen table, surrounded by evidence of a life fully lived, Marcus felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced since before Sarah's death. Alina asked gentle questions about his week. Listening with the same attention, she brought to their reading sessions. And gradually Marcus found himself talking about things he had kept locked away. He told her about the anniversary of Sarah's death that was approaching, about the guilt he felt whenever he caught himself laughing or enjoying a moment, about the fear that moving forward meant leaving Sarah behind. Alina listened without interrupting, then shared her own experience of similar feelings after her husband's death. She explained that grief had its own timeline, that healing wasn't linear, that loving someone who was gone didn't prevent you from finding joy in the present. Alina stood up and walked to a bookshelf, returning with a well-worn photo album. As she turned the pages, showing Marcus pictures of her life with her husband, she spoke about the process of learning to treasure memories without being trapped by them. She pointed to a photo of herself laughing at their daughter's wedding, taken just months after her husband's funeral, explained how guilty she had felt for experiencing happiness so soon after his death, but time had taught her that joy and grief could coexist, that honoring someone's memory didn't require permanent sorrow. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus realized he was seeing Alina in a new light. Her strength, wisdom, and capacity for finding beauty in everyday moments attracted him in ways that felt both natural and terrifying. The recognition that he was developing feelings for someone other than Sarah brought a fresh wave of guilt, but also a whisper of possibility he hadn't allowed himself to consider. Alina seemed to sense his internal struggle without him saying anything. Reaching across the table to squeeze his hand gently, their conversation continued as the sun began to set, covering topics they had never explored during their structured reading sessions. Alina talked about her dreams for the future, her desire to travel and maybe take art classes, her hope of becoming a grandmother someday. Marcus found himself sharing tentative thoughts about what he might want if he allowed himself to imagine a future beyond mere survival. The vulnerability of these admissions felt risky, but also liberating. When Marcus finally prepared to leave, Lena walked him to the door and thanked him for checking on her. Standing close enough to see the kindness in her eyes, Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, like a door that had been locked tight finally beginning to creak open. Alina smiled and suggested they resume their reading sessions the following week, but also mentioned that she would enjoy spending time together outside the community center if he was interested. The invitation hung in the air between them, full of potential and promise that scared Marcus as much as it thrilled him. Marcus spent the week wrestling with emotions he had convinced himself were buried forever. The idea of feeling attracted to someone other than Sarah brought waves of guilt that threatened to drown him. But underneath the guilt was something else, something that felt like hope trying to break through concrete. He found himself thinking about Elena's smile, her gentle wisdom, the way she made even difficult conversations feel safe and healing. When Saturday arrived, Marcus showed up at the community center with flowers he had bought on impulse, then spent 10 minutes in his car debating whether giving them to Elena would cross a line he wasn't ready to cross. Finally, he decided that friendship could include flowers, that Elena deserved recognition for how much she had helped him without even trying. Her reaction when he presented the small bouquet was worth every moment of his internal debate, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure and surprise. Their reading session that day felt different, charged with an undercurrent of awareness that neither of them acknowledged directly. They worked through a story about second chances in love, both pretending not to notice the parallels to their own situation. When Elena stumbled over a particularly complex passage, Marcus moved his chair closer to help her. The simple proximity sent his heart racing in a way that felt both wonderful and terrifying. After their session ended, Elena invited Marcus to join her for lunch at a small Mexican restaurant near the community center. Over plates of food that reminded Elena of her childhood, they talked about everything except the obvious tension building between them. Elena shared more stories about her family, her work as a seamstress, and her adjustment to life in America. Marcus found himself opening up about his relationship with Sarah, describing their courtship and marriage with a fondness that no longer felt exclusively painful. As they walked back to their cars after lunch, Elena stopped and turned to face Marcus directly. With characteristic honesty, she acknowledged the connection growing between them and gently asked if he was ready to explore whatever this was becoming. Her directness cut through his uncertainty like sunlight through clouds, and Marcus found himself admitting that he cared about her in ways that both thrilled and terrified him. Elena's response was to take his hand and suggest they take things slowly, allowing their friendship to evolve naturally without pressure or expectations. Their first official date was a visit to the botanical gardens that Elena had mentioned. Wanting to see, walking among the flowers and plants, Elena's enthusiasm was infectious, and Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying the experience rather than just going through motions. When Elena stopped to admire a rose garden, she mentioned that her husband had proposed to her in a similar setting 50 years earlier. The comment could have been a barrier, but instead it felt like Elena was sharing another piece of her heart, trusting Marcus with her most precious memories. That evening, as Marcus walked Elena to her apartment door, she surprised him by standing on her tiptoes to kiss his cheek softly. The gesture was sweet and innocent, but it sent electricity through Marcus's entire body, reminding him of feelings he thought had died with Sarah. Elena's eyes met his with understanding and patience, as if she knew exactly what he was experiencing, and was willing to wait for him to find his way through the maze of guilt and longing. Driving home that night, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of anticipation for the future. The guilt was still there, would probably always be there to some degree, but it was balanced now by the recognition that life was offering him another chance at happiness. Elena had shown him that loving someone new didn't diminish his love for Sarah, that the human heart was capable of holding multiple truths simultaneously. For the first time since the accident, Marcus allowed himself to imagine a future that included joy, companionship, and maybe even love. 6 months later, Marcus stood in Elena's kitchen, helping her prepare dinner for her daughter's family, who were visiting for the weekend. The domestic scene felt natural now, comfortable in a way that had taken time to develop but felt increasingly right with each passing day. Elena's grandchildren had quickly adopted Marcus as an honorary family member, and their easy acceptance had helped him believe that building a new life didn't require abandoning the past. The anniversary of Sarah's death had come and gone with less devastation than Marcus had feared. Elena had understood his need to spend that day alone, visiting Sarah's grave and remembering their life together. When he returned to Elena's apartment that evening, she had simply held him while he cried, offering comfort without trying to fix or analyze his grief. Her acceptance of his ongoing love for Sarah had been one of the greatest gifts she could have given him. Marcus had finally begun the process of packing away some of Sarah's belongings, not to forget her, but to make space for the life he was building with Alina. The wedding photo still sat on his mantle, but it was now accompanied by pictures of him and Alina at the botanical gardens. At the community center graduation ceremony where Alina had read aloud in English for the first time, and at family gatherings where she had gradually introduced him to her extensive network of children, grandchildren, and longtime friends, their relationship had developed slowly, built on a foundation of friendship and mutual respect that made every milestone feel earned rather than rushed. Elena's patience with Marcus's journey through grief had been extraordinary, never pushing him to move faster than he was ready to go, but also gently encouraging him to remain open to the possibilities life was offering. Her own experience with loss had given her insights that no one else in Marcus's life could provide. The reading sessions at the community center had evolved into something neither of them had expected. Alina now read confidently at a high school. Evelyn had become a mentor to newer students, sharing her story to encourage others who felt embarrassed about their educational gaps. Marcus had expanded his volunteer work to include tax preparation assistance and had discovered that helping others navigate their challenges gave his own life a deeper meaning than his previous isolated existence. Elena's influence had extended far beyond teaching Marcus to feel again. She had shown him how to find purpose and service to others, how to appreciate small daily pleasures, and how to honor the past while embracing the future. Perspective on aging as an opportunity for continued growth rather than gradual decline had challenged his assumptions about what life after loss could look like. At 73, Alina approached each day with curiosity and optimism that inspired everyone around her as they sat down to dinner with Elena's family. Marcus looked around the table at the faces that had become dear to him and felt overwhelmed. With gratitude, the journey from devastating grief to unexpected love had been longer and more complicated than any story he might have imagined. But it had taught him that the human capacity for healing and growth never truly ends. Sarah would always be part of his story, but she was no longer the only chapter. Alina caught his eye across the table and smiled. It's the same gentle, knowing expression that had first drawn him to her at the community center. That smile was acknowledgement of everything they had both lost and everything they had found together. Marcus smiled back, feeling his heart full in a way he had never expected to experience again. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain but no longer empty, filled with the promise of continued learning, growing, and loving. Alina had taught him that grief and joy could coexist, that second chances were possible at any age, and that the heart's capacity for love was far greater than he had ever imagined.